Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really potent idea that came out of 1950s Argentina. It's a whole philosophy that looks at political leadership not as some dry science, but as a genuine art form. We're going to break down what Conducción Politico is all about. So let's just start with a question that gets right to the heart of all this. Can you actually build a leader in a classroom? Is it a skill you can practice and get better at, or is it just something you're born with? Well, the philosophy we're exploring today has a very, very clear answer to that. So our story kicks off back in 1951 at this pretty unique place, the Escuela Superior Peronista. And its mission, incredibly direct: train a brand new generation of political leaders. And look, these weren't just abstract, theoretical lectures. We're talking practical classes on leadership, taught by the president himself, Juan Perón, to get his entire movement on the same page. The course subject was Conducción, Política, which just means political leadership. But here's what's so fascinating. It's how they framed it. This wasn't a science with a bunch of formulas you had to memorize. No, leadership was treated as an art. Sure, it's got theory, it's got technique, but at the end of the day, it requires a creative spark, and they believed that spark could be nurtured and developed in people. Now, to really get this new vision of leadership, you've got to understand what it was pushing back against. This whole philosophy was basically built on a direct contrast between two totally different kinds of leaders. And this right here is the core distinction. On one side, you have the caudillo. This is your traditional strongman leader. His leadership is all about his personality. People are loyal to the man. His authority is completely personal. But on the other side, you have the conductor. This leader's job is to unite people around a cause, around a shared belief system. Here, the loyalty is to the idea. Action is guided by a framework that everybody shares, not just whatever one person feels like doing that day. This quote, wow, it really gets to the heart of the problem they saw with the old way of doing things. The big criticism was that people were just following other men. They weren't following a cause. The what, the actual plan, the program, it just didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was who. The conductor was designed to be the absolute opposite of that. So if the old way was all about personality, the new way was all about process. And this brings us right back to that idea of leadership as an art they described as being, quote, simple and all about execution. The best way to think about conduction is to compare it to painting or sculpture. Think about it. You can learn all the color theory in the world, you can master every single brushstroke, but that stuff alone doesn't make you a great artist, right? The masterpiece, that requires the creative spark. And this philosophy argued that leadership is exactly the same. You can learn the theory, but real leadership is about applying it creatively, in the moment. This idea totally reframes the leader's role. You're not just a manager or a boss. You are a constructor of successes. This idea, which they often attributed to Napoleon, argues that success isn't just about getting lucky. No, it's something you deliberately build, piece by piece, through a really methodical process. And here are the 5 stages of that building process. It all starts with conceiving the idea. Then you prepare the groundwork. You organize all the different parts you need. You realize the plan by actually executing it. And then finally, you exploit the success. And what that means is you capitalize on it. You build on it for what comes next. It's a whole life cycle for getting something done. Okay, so if that's the philosophy, what's the playbook? How does a constructor of successes actually operate day to day? Well, this is where the theory gets super practical and lays out a very clear method of action. The whole process kicks off with a situation. You have to deeply, deeply understand and truly live the reality you're in. In fact, this philosophy claims that a whopping 90% of leadership errors come from just misreading the situation. Next up is appreciation. You analyze that reality, break it down, and it's only then that the plan emerges. It just flows naturally from your analysis. And finally, execution. Because let's be honest, a brilliant plan that just sits on a shelf is worthless. Action is always above conception. So what's the end game here? Why train leaders this way? Well, this entire system was designed to build one specific thing: a new vision for the whole nation. The ultimate goal was to create what they called a comunidad organizada, an organized community. And in this vision of social democracy, power flows up from the people's organizations, not just down from political parties. The whole point was to have a system built for Argentina's own reality, one that was focused on social justice and national development and real self-determination, instead of just importing ideologies from other countries. And, it's also really interesting how this philosophy actively tries to distance itself from the label populism. The argument they make is that populism is just a negative catch-all term that opponents use, and that it totally misses the specific, unique doctrine they were actually putting forward. And honestly, maybe nothing sums up this conductor model better than this final quote right here. It totally reframes leadership not as a single action, but as the very last step in a sequence. First, you organize, then you educate, then you enable. And only after all of that groundwork has been laid do you finally lead. And that brings us to our final thought. If we take this historical framework and bring it into today, what does it really mean to be a constructor of successes in any field of leadership? Is success something we can methodically build with a plan, or is it just something we stumble upon by chance? It's a question worth thinking about. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.